Earlier in our conversation, you said that one of the questions Nietzsche was always asking was, what is the value of our values? And I understand that he's engaged in a critique of morality. And so what I'm wondering is, where does this put us in the end if we are not supposed to be following the Judeo-Christian values as if they're the end all be all of morality? What does this leave us with? And is there anything practical for our daily lives or just our contemporary introspection that you take away from Nietzsche's genealogical reflections?
Okay, good. A perfectly fair question, of course. Um, First thing that needs to be said is, it's not clear who is Nietzsche's intended audience, right? Nietzsche sometimes says herd morality for the herd, but not for higher human beings, right? Um, in the 1870s, when he's younger, I think he holds out this idea of sort of a cultural and political transformation of Europe will be helped along by Richard Wagner's music, and the birth of tragedy would explain the role of music in transforming culture. And that aspiration kind of dies out. I think he becomes less interested in politics, less interested in cultural transformation. And that explains something very striking about Nietzsche's writing in the 1880s, which is he often, as it were, discourages certain readers from reading him. Not too many authors do this, right? But he kind of makes clear that this isn't for everyone, right? This isn't for everyone. For some people, this won't make any sense at all. It'll sound like a crime, as he puts it, right? So he wants certain select readers, right, to take this seriously. Right? So let's suppose we are among these select readers. I mean, the irony, of course, is Nietzsche writes so well that everyone wants to read him. Right? If you only wanted select readers, you'd write as badly as Kant or Hegel, right? And then you'd get a bunch of dweeby graduate students and scholars, and that's the only people. But everyone reads Nietzsche because he writes so well. It's a little ironic. But let's suppose we are among Nietzsche's intended readers who are, who share his ears, as he puts it, share his sensibilities. I take it what he hopes for those readers is a certain kind of transformation of their consciousness. He hopes to disabuse them of their starting point, which is that what's morality? Well, Judeo-Christian morality, that's all morality is. Right? It's the only set of values that really makes any sense. It was given to us by God. He'd like to change these readers' views about that. Right? And part of the reason he wants to do this, and this is something we haven't touched on, but is very important to his attack on morality, right? It's his answer to the question, what's the value of morality? His worry is that individuals who might be truly great human beings, and he has he has four main examples. Goethe, the great German poet, dramatist, essayist, scientist, the true Renaissance man of, the late 18th, early 19th century. Beethoven is a second example. A third is Napoleon, which was very common in the 19th century. He was viewed as kind of a military and political genius, who did, as it were, put his vision of politics and society, impose it on Europe, partly through force, but partly through political ingenuity, right? France to this day is still Napoleon's France in terms of its administrative and bureaucratic structure. The fourth was Nietzsche himself, though he's a little more coy about that, right? And so Nietzsche's question is, right, Nietzsche's thought is that you can't be a great human being like Beethoven or Goethe or Napoleon if you took Christian morality seriously. Right? If you really took Christian morality seriously, you couldn't practice what he calls the severe self-love that is required for any great achievement, for example. Right? Beethoven, wasn't an out and out atheist, but if you read a biography of Beethoven, you see right away he was not a very Christian fellow. He used everyone around him instrumentally for purposes of pursuing his musical work. Beethoven could easily have descended into self-pity about his suffering, right? Because his suffering was horrible, right? I mean, here's a composer going deaf. Right? It's hard to imagine something more grotesque. And he did at one point contemplate suicide. Um, but instead of, wallowing in self-pity, as it were, he just kept on going, right, despite his suffering. So that the Ninth Symphony, if not the greatest piece of music ever written, it's certainly got to be up there. And it's written while he's entirely dead. And in, one of the most sort of tragic images I can imagine, Beethoven conducted the debut of the Ninth Symphony, but it was a courtesy done to him. It was really conducted by a conductor below the stage level because Beethoven couldn't hear anything. But as a matter of respect, they let him do the pretend conducting of it. And it's just extraordinary when you think about it. Such a spectacular piece of music, and he could hear none of it. He could hear none of it. Okay. Nietzsche worries if you really take, moral egalitarianism seriously, our obligations to others, the kind of stuff that, moral philosophers prattle on about endlessly, right? If you really, take that seriously, you wouldn't have been Beethoven, Goethe, or Napoleon. They didn't lead Christian lives in terms of, conforming their practice to the dictates of the religion. And I do think this is what Nietzsche fundamentally worries about, is that a society that is dominated by these kinds of values, right, is going to be a society without any exemplars of human greatness. It's going to be a society of tedious, boring mediocrities and those that Nietzsche called the last men, who are sort of like, sort of the ultimate, bourgeois. They want everything to be comfortable and peaceful and tranquil, and they have no real aspirations, and they certainly, they don't produce any Napoleons or Beethovens or Goethes. That, in the end, I think, is what Nietzsche is really worried about, is that this triumph of Christian morality, unless it's defeated, is going to produce this kind of pathetic culture. And, now we have a causal question about whether he's, right, whether that is the explanation. I think one of the things the Marxist tradition does is it shows the way in which capitalist markets contribute to the degradation of culture, right? Nietzsche would have been happy with that aspect of Marxism. Because Nietzsche himself, he had this, he disliked capitalism very much, but not for what we would call any moralism. He wasn't concerned about exploitation and so on. He thought, though, that it contributed to this general degradation of, modern civilization. So Nietzsche, I think, hopes to transform the consciousness of at least his rightful readers so that the nascent Goethes and the nascent Beethovens will not be misled into taking Christian morality too seriously. That would be the very sort of simple slogan version of what we're supposed to take from this in the end. Though, again, if Nietzsche's right about the incompatibility of Christian morality and certain forms of human greatness, then we can all ask the question. Philippa Foot made this point years ago, don't we want to live in a society, in a civilization where there are Beethovens and Goethes? Right? That's something all of us can care about, even us herd animals.